Hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting episode of Building Subtext. Today, I want to talk about what it takes to change your story form. It's a question that comes up a lot with subtext. It's a source of a lot of frustration because a lot of people don't understand why they can't just easily change it. And then why doesn't subtext update everything in the background? And so I thought it might be fun just to go through what it takes to change what is essentially the entire narrative structure of your story all at once. So if you're not familiar, the story form is a collection of thematic elements across 4 different perspectives that create a complete story and help make the argument of the story. So today I'm going to use the example of Ex Machina, which is a great film. We have the 4 through lines here that are listed up at the top. You have the objective story, which is essentially the plot, the little invite to his house. Come check out my new creation. The main character is Caleb. He's the guy who wins the assignment. The obstacle character, the one that challenges Caleb to grow beyond his own personal justifications, is the subject herself, Ava. And then the relationship story is the relationship between man and machine through the testing and whatever kind of assumed relationship is there, but doesn't turn out as well as it probably could have. So in this story, the arrangement of all the through lines and all the thematic elements that they're going over can be found in this schematic here. So all of these are interrelated with one another. They're all different. They all have all these different connection points. They have places where they are similar across through lines. So for instance, the most important part, which is what we'll talk about today, is the crossover between plot and character. Stories are both character driven and plot driven. They're not separate things. And the main place where you see this are in the pivotal elements here in subtext, which in this particular story, it's not the same in every story, happens to be around the problem and solution in the objective story and the problem and solution in the main character through line. They reflect one another. In other words, the problem driving the story of Ex Machina is complete self-obsession. And you can see this mostly in Oscar Isaac's character, Nathan, because he's completely self-obsessed, overly self-aware, to the point where he's not really aware of what's going on, although he tries to. And because of that self-awareness that also is shared by Ava, and then also by Caleb, because he's in on his own thing, is why it ends in failure at the end. They never quite get to a greater awareness, a greater sensitivity towards everything else that's going on. And then meanwhile, Caleb has his own personal journey going from self-awareness to awareness. This is everything all at once, and it's the entire narrative, and it connects and predicts everything from beginning to end. So because these are the problem and solution, because it ends up in failure, it can predict what's going to happen in each act. That's what you're seeing here from a very broad perspective. But what frequently happens is when people are working on their own stories, they might start to get an idea of, wait a second, I think self-awareness isn't the problem I want to explore in my story. I would rather explore the difference between order and chaos. That's another pair that could be the argument between the main character and the obstacle character. The argument that's going on in Ex Machina is this argument between awareness, sensitivity to others, being aware of what's going on around you, versus being completely self-aware and looking inward and introspective. And that's the argument that's going on. And that creates that dynamic contract between the main character and the obstacle character, which is also part of the plot, which then ties everything together. So let's say that you're like everybody and you would like to change that. So in subtext here, this is the story development screen for Ex Machina. And I have the complete story form here. So this is the same exact thing that I showed you with all the nice pictures. And then if you go down at the bottom, you'll see the dramatic argument here, which is the argument between the pivotal elements. You can see Caleb here is driven by awareness. And so that's his side of the argument. And if he was to speak the theme, it would be awareness is the way that you should be. And you can see that spelled out here in the illustration of storytelling Caleb Smith's argument revolves around the importance of being externally sensitive to others, even if those others challenge our understanding of sentience. You can see that's where he's coming from in the narrative, and that is an instance of awareness. Now, awareness has lots of different ways that it could be told, but at the base, when you pull it back into what is the core thing that is motivating or driving the conflict in the story, you're going to find it's aware. Then to counter that, the dynamic pair, when you bring up awareness, you have to bring up self-awareness. That's the opposite. It's not unawareness, because that's just more awareness. It's just a lack of awareness. In order to counter and balance out awareness, you need to look at self-awareness. Here, Ava is looking inward, which makes complete sense. She's completely looking in towards herself. And you can see that expressed in the storytelling. Ava, as a humanoid robot with advanced artificial intelligence, embodies a unique perspective on the thematic topic of looking inward. Her journey is not just about physical escape, but represents a deeper quest for self-discovery and understanding. And you can automatically feel the dynamic tension. You could even just go and write the story just based on these two elements. The story form has all this stuff, but you could really just take this and be able to start developing a story from it. So this is the core argument between the main character and the obstacle character. But it could be that you find out as you're going through it, maybe I'm not really so interested in talking about the self-awareness of Nathan. And Nathan's a good one to use just because he's not the main character, the obstacle character. For instance, another pair that would keep a lot of these dynamics in place would be something like order or chaos. Or actually, just to keep it really compact, let's look at inequity and equity. So the difference between inequity and equity, which would keep a lot of the other dynamics that are in the story the same, is somebody who's driven to look at inequities is always seeing how the imbalance between things and the unfairness between things and how everything is inequitable. And then somebody coming from the opposite side would be looking towards equity. So looking towards justice, fairness, balance, making sure everything's peaceful. Let's say, for instance, in this story, it isn't so much about self-awareness and awareness as it is about inequity and equity. And I'm going to say that the problem of the story is inequity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch out. If I was to really redo the entire story form, a lot of these things would change. The order of events might change, the obstacle character and where she's coming from, how the relationship develops. For the sake and simplicity of just a short, relatively short YouTube video, I'm just going to flip what is essentially the core problem and solution of the story with where the actual work is done in the story. Even though this is the problem that is driving all the conflict, what everybody is focused on is the inequities. Like, oh, this machine is smarter than me. Oh, it's not fair that you're keeping her out of here. And so then the direction is moving towards fairness and justice and balance. Let's say, because it's just a slight change, let's just go ahead and switch it so that Ava is not so much about her self-awareness, but about how inequitable things are. Not only that she's quote unquote like trapped, but also that she's much more powerful, much more smarter than everyone. And the main character, Caleb, isn't going to be so much about his sensitivity towards her. He's going to be much more about justice and how you have to be fair in all cases. So you can see it's a different story. You can see there's parts of that show up in the narrative, but it's certainly not the core argument of the entire thing. Before the introduction of the world of AI and before Subtxt had AI, you would have to do this manually. You'd have to rebuild the entire story form. You would then have to manually go in and change all the different illustrations. And it was overwhelming that most people would just give up and say, this is a huge waste of time. It's no different than if you had worked on a draft for about 5 or 6 months, and then you realized, oh, wait, my story isn't about, essentially, you might not know the difference between self-awareness and awareness, but my story isn't about that. It's about inequity and equity. So then you'd have to go back and rewrite everything. It's the same exact thing. It's not that there's anything wrong with subtext. Subtext is just giving you the specific words and relationship between things so you know what it is you're changing. In the near future, this will be a one button thing. Hey, can you just go ahead and change and redo all the illustrations? It's not simple, but it is possible given how things are set up now. Currently, because it's a high level sort of thing to do, and there's a lot of work that goes into it, you can do it manually. So for instance, if you had made this change and you wanted to simply change the pivotal elements of the obstacle character and the main character, it's as simple as just looking at what the storytelling is and then just talking with Muse, Subtxt Muse, and having it rewrite it in terms of that new element. I'm going to use Muse, the standalone one. You can use it within the context of the story and develop it here. But because that always looks to what the story form is, I don't want it to be influenced by that. So let's say I have following illustration of the MC pivotal element, my story, and it's aware, and I'd like you to rewrite it if the element was equity instead. Instead. That's the thinking behind it. You want to take the illustration that's here, which is an illustration of Caleb being driven by awareness, and now redo it so that it's about equity, because now he's coming from a different point of view. And this is all it takes. So you would just do this. It'll go through, understand what all these different elements mean, and then rewrite it with the new understanding of that. And then the idea is that you would do that for every story point that changed in the story form. And like I said, there's 75 of them. It can take a little bit of time manually. The nice thing about it when you're the author, if you enjoy developing stories and it's a fun process for you, you get to actually learn how stories work. And it's actually developing in your mind the relationship between items so that possibly the next time you won't have as many changes as you would that you usually do. So here you can see it completely rewrote it, no longer focusing on awareness, but now focusing on equity. Caleb Smith's argument centers on the necessity of maintaining fairness and balance in our interactions, especially when dealing with entities that push the boundaries of our understandings of consciousness. Wonderful. That's a completely different argument than the one that is from awareness. It's a very slight change, but hopefully you can perceive the difference between that and how important that is. That's his pivotal element. And then if you remember hers, I'm going to make inequity. So it's not going to be so much about looking inward. It's going to be about inequity. So then, wonderful. I'd also like to rewrite the illustration of the OC pivotal element, which is currently self-aware. I am changing it to inequity. And then I'll just put the illustration here. This is exactly what a automatic subtext will be doing in the very near future. So that when you get through and you form your story and you decide, no, wait, I actually want it to be in this area, it will just go through and once you've made that decision, go ahead and rewrite everything. So here we go. Ava, as a humanoid robot equipped with advanced artificial intelligence, represents a unique stance on the thematic issue of imbalance and injustice. Her journey transcends mere physical liberation, embodying a deeper exploration of identity and the quest for equity. Ava's argument is that the pursuit of fairness and the recognition of inequity are not traits confined to humans. They are essential aspects of consciousness that go beyond biological limitations. Wonderful. So then that is how you would start to recontextualize the arguments between the main character and the obstacle character, which is just that one core thing. You could also change it to order and chaos. This is all great. Now I'm thinking the argument between the MC and OC would be order versus chaos, with the MC being order and the OC being chaos. I have no idea what would that look like. This way you can play with it so that, oh wait, maybe inequity to equity is okay, but maybe actually I'm more interested in the structured nature of these relationships between man and machine versus the chaotic happenstance or illusory relationship between those things, like the chaotic randomness that happens. This is explained in a narrative where the main character embodies order and the obstacle character embodies chaos. The thematic argument revolves around the clash between structure and unpredictability. This dynamic creates a rich tapestry. So the main character would be driven by a desire to maintain structure, predictability, and organization in their environment. And you could see, oh, that would also translate really well to Nathan. And you could see, oh, that would be a totally different story than what Ex Machina was. It's something that's more about the structure of life and making sure everything's in its right spot. And then the obstacle character, who you would assume, because they've been programmed, would be very structural, actually thrives in unpredictability and disarray, which is funny because if you do any AI programming, you know that the order that you've been used to over the last 20, 30 years is now becoming unpredictable and chaotic, and all kinds of different inferences that are coming into the game where responses back are not always the same, but that's actually a benefit. This character would challenge the main character's worldview by demonstrating the value and necessity of randomness, spontaneity, and disorder. So then now you could play with that argument. And what is their downfall is their reliance on structure and their reliance on making sure everything fits into place. When if they had just allowed a little more chaos into it, maybe they would have survived in a different way. This is fantastic. It just keeps going on. And that argument between the two of them would play out where the main character's drive for order would clash with the obstacle character's embrace of chaos. So they could play with the balance between control and freedom, the necessity of chaos for growth and change, which that's the cautionary tale. Like you need that chaotic element in order to change, because if you live within those rigid structures, then it just keeps you confined when everything is changing. You need to be able to play with both of that. I hope that makes sense. This is a fantastic answer. I hope that makes sense in context of what it takes to change the story form. It really is, you are taking the chaotic story ideas that you have, and a story form is molding those chaotic elements into a form that then can communicate the premise to your audience. Just like what I just said here, there's a nice balance between the two of them, and there will be chaotic moments where you will want to unravel the story form and reform it around different arguments. You'll eventually want to get to a place where you have just one story form across the entire narrative. You don't want it to change in the middle of it, because you'll be setting up all these dynamics. And then if you change it or break it, that's when you get story holes or things don't quite work out the way that you had expected them to. So you definitely want to find a common ground at the end that you can then refer back to. But if you want to reform it and pivot it around another set of dynamic elements, this is the process that you would go through. This is the approach you would take in order to do it and to stay in the driver's seat, right? So if I do an automatic thing that's going to go through and do all of this for you, I'm going to be the one, or the AI is going to be the one that picks what is the new elements. I guess essentially you would pick them, but its interpretation of those, it's going to do the whole thing all at once. Whereas if you do it manually, you're not wholly staying in control and can guide it and direct it in the way you want, but then it can also bring up other ideas and also makes you a better storyteller in the process. So that's it for changing your story form. If you have any questions, please let me know down below or get in contact with me directly. Otherwise, I will see you next time.